Picture this. A 20-year-old woman jumps out of an airplane. Not for a thrill, not for a photograph, but because it is one more requirement on a checklist that will never stop growing. She lands. She folds her parachute. She says nothing about how her hands are shaking. Because she cannot. Because the entire apparatus of a 600-year-old monarchy is watching her, and monarchies do not tolerate visible fear. This is Princess Leonor of Spain, and for 3 straight years, she has not been allowed a single ordinary emotion in public. Today, we are going to talk about what that actually costs a person. Not the fairy tale version. The real one. If you have spent any time in this corner of the internet, you have probably seen a headline claiming Leonor sent a private message that leaked, that she said she was done, that she is on the verge of some kind of breakdown. We are not going to repeat that headline as fact, because it is not fact. There is no leaked message. There is no verified quote. What we are going to do instead is something more useful, and frankly more respectful to her as a human being. We are going to look at what has actually been documented, by palace statements, by Spanish Defense Ministry announcements, by journalists who were physically present at these training academies, and we are going to ask what 3 years of that kind of pressure does to a 20-year-old. Because you do not need an invented quote to understand that this has been hard. The facts alone tell you that. Let's go back to March of 2023. Spain's defense minister stands in front of cameras and announces that the heir to the throne will begin a military career, as is tradition for parliamentary monarchies. Leonor is 17 years old. She has just finished an international baccalaureate program at a boarding school in Wales, thousands of miles from her family, from her home, from anything resembling normal teenage life. And instead of choosing a university, instead of choosing a gap year, instead of choosing anything, she is handed a 3-year military commitment that was decided for her by constitutional obligation before she was even born. This is the first thing to understand about Leonor's life. Very little of it has ever been a choice. She arrives at the General Military Academy in Zaragoza in August of 2023. This is not a ceremonial posting. This is the same academy that trains actual Spanish army officers, and she is expected to meet the same physical and academic standards as every other cadet, with the added weight that her every stumble will be photographed, printed, and dissected by a press corps that has followed her since the day she was born. Imagine doing push-ups in front of people who are quietly hoping you fail so they'll have a headline. Imagine that being your daily reality for months at a time. Year 2 takes her to the Naval Military School of Marin, and from there on to the Juan Sebastián del Cano, a training ship that spends months at sea. If you know anything about that voyage, you know it is not a pleasure cruise. Cadets sleep in cramped quarters, stand watch through the night, and are cut off from nearly all contact with the outside world for weeks at a stretch. For most 20-year-olds, being unreachable is a mild inconvenience. For the heir to a throne, being unreachable during a moment of national or family crisis is a genuine institutional risk, and you can be sure that weighed on her, even if no one ever said it out loud in a press release. By 2026, she has moved into the third and final phase, training with the General Air and Space Academy in Murcia. And this is where things get particularly telling, because in June of this year, she becomes the first member of the Spanish royal family in history to complete parachute training. Not her father, not her grandfather, neither King Felipe nor King Juan Carlos ever did this. Spanish military sources describe the basic parachuting course as one of the most demanding elements of the entire program, requiring what officials called the ability to operate under pressure. Read that phrase again. Operate under pressure. That is not marketing language. That is a technical description of what her body and mind were being trained to withstand, jump after jump, at an air base in a region far from the palace that raised her. Let's pause here, because I want you to sit with something. 3 years. 3 separate branches of the armed forces. Zaragoza, then Marin and months at sea, then Murcia and a parachute course that neither of her royal predecessors even attempted. Somewhere in the middle of all of that, she also had to publicly support her younger sister Sofia during a major milestone address in Madrid, had to appear composed for a royal audience with the visiting pope, had to smile through commemorative ceremonies, had to be, in essence, 2 people at once, exhausted cadet and flawless princess. If you were maxing out your family, your career, and your identity all in the same year, you would call that burnout. When it happens to a future queen, we call it duty, and we rarely ask what it costs her privately, because the institution was never built to let her tell us. Here's what makes this moment different from every other hard chapter in her life so far. On July 10th of this year, she graduated. All 3 phases complete. She stood at the General Air and Space Academy in Murcia in her Navy uniform, and her own father, acting in his role as Captain General of the Spanish Armed Forces, promoted her to junior naval officer. Queen Letizia stood beside them in pale pink lace, and for one afternoon, the family that has spent 3 years mostly apart, mostly performing, stood together in what by every account was a moment of genuine, visible emotion. If you watch the footage from that day, you don't need an invented leaked text message to see what 3 years of pressure finally releasing looks like on a person's face. And here is the twist that almost nobody is talking about, because it doesn't fit the manufactured crisis narrative that clickbait channels want you to believe. Leonor isn't running away from anything. She isn't quitting. What she is actually doing is walking straight into the next phase of an obligation she has never once publicly resisted. This fall, she begins a degree in political science at Carlos III University in Getafe, just outside Madrid. According to the Spanish royal household's own statement, she cleared the same evaluation process required of any student who completed secondary education abroad. No special track, no shortcut, just a formal admissions decision, like anyone else applying with an international diploma. But notice the structure of what's been announced for her. A professional 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. schedule. A 25-minute commute from Zarzuela Palace, meaning she will, for the first time in 5 years, actually be commuting from home rather than living away at a military academy. On paper, this sounds almost aggressively normal. A young woman getting up, driving to class, sitting through what officials have already flagged will include, in her case as in every other student's case, brutal statistics and macroeconomics exams that are, in the palace's own choice of words when discussed by royal watchers, dreaded by basically everyone in that program. She is going to sit in a lecture hall and stress about the same exams as every other 19 or 20-year-old in that building. That is not a breakdown. That is, for the first time since she was a teenager, something resembling an ordinary life, wedged in between institutional duties that never fully go away. This is the part where I want to talk honestly about pressure, because it's the part that actually matters, more than any fabricated leaked message ever could. Leonor has spent essentially her entire adolescence and the whole of her early 20s inside institutions that do not permit public vulnerability. The military does not want a princess who visibly struggles. The palace communications office does not release statements about how tired she is. And yet if you follow the actual documented timeline, what you see is a young woman who has been asked to do genuinely difficult things back to back to back, with almost no gap for rest, decompression, or simple boredom, which, believe it or not, is something every developing brain actually needs. There's a piece of academic research worth bringing in here, because it tells you something real about the environment she is stepping into rather than out of. A study out of the University of Murcia, examining public attitudes toward the monarchy, has repeatedly found a generational split in how younger Spaniards view the institution Leonor is set to inherit. Support for the monarchy tends to run lower among younger respondents than older ones, a trend Spanish pollsters have tracked for years. That matters here because it means Leonor isn't just absorbing personal physical and academic pressure. She is also stepping into a political climate where a meaningful portion of the country she will one day represent as head of state is, at minimum, ambivalent about the very existence of her future role. She is not simply tired from training. She is tired from training while also being the living answer to a question a chunk of her own generation isn't sure they want asked. And there's a legal dimension too, one that almost never gets discussed in the breathless leaked message content that floods this space. Article 57 of the Spanish Constitution places real formal limits on who Leonor is even allowed to marry without risking exclusion from the line of succession. Her personal life, in a very literal legal sense, is not entirely her own to navigate the way yours or mine is. So when people online invent a scenario where she supposedly cracks and declares she's done, what they're actually reaching for, consciously or not, is a real and legitimate question. What does it feel like to be 20 years old and know that even your future spouse is subject to constitutional approval? That's a genuinely heavy thing to carry. You don't need to fabricate a leaked text to make that point. The Constitution itself makes it for you. So where does that leave us? Not with a scandal, not with a princess in crisis. What the actual record shows is something quieter and, honestly, more human. A young woman who spent 3 years being tested by 3 different branches of the armed forces, who became the first royal in her family's history to complete a parachute jump, who stood in her father's presence on graduation day and was promoted by his own hand, and who is now, for the first time in half a decade, coming home. Not home to rest, not really. Home to statistics exams and macroeconomics and a 25-minute commute and, underneath all of that, the same institutional weight she has carried since she was 17. The military uniform comes off. The crown does not. If there is a version of Leonor saying "I'm done," it isn't a leaked message. It's a graduation ceremony in Murcia this past July, her father's hand on her shoulder, 3 years of training finally, visibly, complete. That's not surrender. If anything, it's the opposite. It's proof she finished exactly what was asked of her, without a single public complaint, for 3 straight years. Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel exists specifically because so much of what gets published about the Spanish royal family online right now is invented. Fabricated leaks, fake quotes, AI-generated nonsense dressed up as journalism. We do the opposite. Every claim you just heard traces back to an actual palace statement, an actual defense ministry announcement, or actual reporting from journalists who were there. If that's the kind of coverage you want more of, hit subscribe, because we are going to keep tracking exactly what happens as Leonor moves from cadet to student to, eventually, queen. Now here's what almost nobody is watching closely enough. The real test isn't behind her. It's ahead of her, and it's arguably harder than anything a parachute course could throw at her. Military training has a clear structure, a syllabus, a known endpoint. University life alongside a full slate of royal institutional duties does not. She will be sitting in lecture halls with classmates who chose to be there, while she was, in the deepest sense, born into it. She will be memorizing statistics formulas on a Tuesday and possibly representing Spain at a state function on a Thursday. There is no training manual for switching between those 2 identities in the same week, and unlike the military academies, no defense minister is going to issue a public statement praising how well she managed the transition. This is the invisible test. Not physical endurance, identity endurance. Staying recognizably herself while playing 2 completely different roles that most of us never have to hold at once. And that, more than any invented leaked message, is the real story worth watching. Not whether Leonor is done. She has shown, repeatedly, across 3 grueling years, that she does not quit. The real question is what it will look like for her to build something resembling a private self, a version of Leonor that exists outside the uniform and outside the crown, in the very narrow margins the institution is willing to give her. That's the story we'll be following closely in the months ahead, as her university year actually begins and we see, in real documented moments rather than fabricated texts, what she chooses to reveal and what she keeps, understandably, to herself. If you want to understand where this story goes next, stick around, because her first public appearances as a university student are coming this fall, and we'll be here breaking down exactly what's real and what isn't, the same way we always do. See you in the next one.